In this video, I'm going to share with you the very best way to learn screenwriting. Now, every human being on the planet is unique, so it's actually going to be different for each writer. That's why we're going to explore 6 ways to learn the craft, and I'll reveal some pros and cons of each approach to try to save you some time, save you some money, and get you real results that are in sync with your unique personality type. Let's do this. Hello, my creative friends. If you're ready to stop writing for your bookshelf and start writing for production, hit the subscribe button, tap that bell, and make sure you don't miss a thing, because you never know which video holds that one key you need to break through. Now, look, when most people have their first big spark of an idea for a movie or a TV show, they jump online, do a little bit of preliminary research about what's involved, find out that screenplays are formatted in a very specific way, get some free formatting software, and then just start typing away. It isn't until much later that they realize that script formatting is just a tiny little part of the equation. At some point, you're going to have to dig in and learn how to do it. You can learn the basics of screenwriting in a relatively short period of time, but to actually learn the craft of it, to develop the skill of being able to do it, takes a bit more time, takes a bit more energy, takes a bit more effort. So it becomes important to find the right way of learning for your particular style and sensibility. So with that said, let's jump into reason number 1. The self-taught way. There is a giant myth that even some very successful screenwriters hang on to that says you can teach yourself screenwriting. But the idea of the self-taught screenwriter is absolute nonsense. You're going to learn from somewhere. If you read a book on screenwriting, you're not self-taught. The author taught you. If you watch a video on screenwriting, you're not self-taught. The video presenter taught you. What I and everyone else means by the self-taught way is the self-guided way. And it includes any of those things: reading books on screenwriting, watching YouTube videos on screenwriting, listening to screenwriting podcasts, reading movie scripts and analyzing them, and doing it all based on what strikes you as the next logical step to take. Now, every writer at some point is going to use the self-taught way, but the self-taught way has a whole lot of pros and a number of really important cons. One of the biggest advantages is that it's generally inexpensive, and you can learn from an infinite array of sources, from books and blogs and YouTube videos and podcasts and webinars, in a way that suits your preferred learning style. You move at your own pace, so you're always following your immediate needs, and you tend not to compare yourself to how other writers are doing. It's driven by your interests and passions, so you're more likely to connect with what you're learning. You gravitate to the things you're drawn to, you push away those things you're not, and you really carve out a path and skill set that's unique to you. Now, the downside of the self-taught approach is that it tends to be information driven. Since you really only pursue knowledge or learning based upon what you're drawn to, you tend to chase information rather than skills. So it's easy to end up with a head full of theory and not a whole lot of ability. Another downside is the dramatically varying quality of your educational sources. An enormous number of educational sources are offering bad advice or ill-informed advice, often just regurgitated from what they've learned elsewhere. Information that often sounds good, but that doesn't actually apply to the real world of professional screenwriting. And you may be unaware that it's bad advice until you see that you've developed some pretty bad habits from that advice. But probably the biggest disadvantage to the self-taught way is that you can end up with extraordinary blind spots and underdeveloped skills. Since we just don't know what we don't know, you can't actively pursue some knowledge or insight that you don't know you're lacking. The self-taught approach can leave you with giant holes in your knowledge that cause you to spin in circles so that it takes you much longer to get where you're trying to go. Personally, I believe that the self-taught way should always be seen as a supplemental means to acquiring new skills and new ideas. And a much more effective way is way number 2, the classes and courses way. This is quite simply where a teacher or instructor guides you through a set curriculum to learn a specific aspect of the craft. There are probably thousands of screenwriting courses all around the world of varying degrees of quality and detail. There are classes and courses that are entirely online, in-person classes that are offered privately, courses at schools and night schools, specific classes that are just focused on one tiny little aspect, or you could even get a 3-year university degree in screenwriting. Now, one of the biggest pros of this way of doing it is that the teacher has thought out the path that you're going to take to acquiring this knowledge. So we can think of it as having a planned outcome. This keeps you on target and ensures you're going to learn the things you need to learn. So there's less chance of blind spots and a greater chance of having a more well-rounded understanding of the topic. You tend to dive deeper into a specific subject than you would on your own. Teachers and professors and academics who are trying to give you a specific outcome tend to spend a lot of time analyzing and trying to figure out the mechanics of how the thing works. So you benefit from the time they've taken to figure these things out. So at their best, classes and courses are easy to consume and to develop skills. You simply follow the path that's been laid out for you. Now, the downside is that classes and courses can be very expensive, especially if we're talking about learning all the skills you need to reach a professional level of writing. Now, you can find inexpensive courses and online learning, but there's a reason a 3-year university degree costs as much as it does. Another huge disadvantage is that work is typically unusable. Writing a screenplay for a class or a course tends to be about the writing exercise and not about actually connecting that project with the industry. So you're often learning in a bit of an academic bubble. Plus, most classes teach theory, the kind of formula or conventional wisdom that can be very dangerous in this particular craft. Since most screenwriting teachers don't have direct production experience, you can spend a lot of time learning ideas and theory which is at odds with your actual target. Classes and courses are and will always be a mixed bag, simply because they're largely a reflection of the person who has created the course or the class. Keep in mind, screenwriting is not just about turning your ideas into a screenplay. A screenplay is a document that is designed to be turned into a movie. So people who don't have that experience are often writing what they think a screenplay should be rather than what the real world industry experience shows them it should be. I do maintain that you can probably extract some pretty valuable nuggets from almost any class or course that exists, but you always have to keep your mind open to learning something new. And that leads us into number 3, which I call the process-driven way. The problem with the first 2 ways is that the teaching itself is modular. You learn aspects of the craft, story structure, character building, dialogue. But in a screenplay, literally every detail is interconnected with every other detail. In a process-driven way, we start at the beginning of the process and move step by step to the end of the process, covering all of those aspects naturally. So as you go through that process, you're improving the skills you need to learn and develop to reach a professional level as you write and sell your screenplay. This gives it the advantages of the classes and courses approach while making sure each action you take equals progress. Because a process-driven approach is about getting you from point A to point B, every step brings practical forward motion, and your skills build and broaden automatically as you write. It keeps you on track because you have a clear path through the chaos, so you never get lost along the way, and you're naturally guided through the obstacles that present themselves. As the pieces of the process snap together, it becomes a framework for your creativity, a container in which you can put the techniques and skills you learn from any other source, making the entire process, its mechanics, and your skill set increasingly intuitive with each project and every draft you write. Now, the downside of the process-driven way is that you can only learn it by doing it. So you move through the process one step at a time, which can make creativity seem a little mechanical. It can make you feel like you're not really following your impulses as you're writing. To wrap your head around it demands trust. Because you're going through it from point A to point B, you can't see what's coming, which forces you to focus on the immediate task at hand. But that can make it feel a little uncertain as you're learning. See, in the self-taught or classes and courses way, because it's modular, you know what you're focusing on. So let's take character building as an example. In a class or a course, you focus on character building, that modular aspect of storytelling. In a process-driven approach, you focus on character building at different points in the process. So early on in the process, you don't have all the tools you need. The tools you're learning and using are sprinkled throughout the journey. So at any given phase, you're working with pieces of the tools, which only snap together to reveal their true power once you get to the end. Now, an effective process-driven approach will address all these problems and even weave solutions throughout that make getting to point B inevitable. But if you're the kind of writer that intuitively pushes back on a guided path, it may take longer to get through that process. And that brings us to a whole different approach to learning screenwriting, which is what I'm going to call the writer's group way. A writer's group is, as its name implies, a group of writers. Often you'll have novelists or screenwriters or short fiction writers come together in a group to write and exchange their work with other writers in the group, to get feedback, to get friendly instruction, to have someone to bounce your ideas off to make sure you're heading in the right direction. Writers often join writers' groups as a way of furthering their learning because they don't want to do more courses, or they don't want to read more books, or they're tired of watching YouTube videos. And the social and interactive nature of the group can really help encourage a writer to keep going. Because you're meeting in person on some regular schedule, it demands that you do the work, and practice develops skills. It's interactive, which encourages feedback and support, and if the group is run in a productive way, you can build a group of people who you can interact with and possibly work with for years into the future. It also thickens your skin and prepares you for the real-world teamwork nature of screenwriting. Just like any writer, screenwriters spend a lot of time alone, which can obscure the fact that as a screenwriter, you're part of a larger team. Being part of an in-person interactive community will always remind you that screenwriting is very much a team sport. Now, the biggest downside of a writer's group is that personality politics can often come into play. Whoever runs the show or who has been writing longest can often think that everything has to be done their way. So writers' groups can often be unstructured or fall prey to dogmatic ways of looking at things. You're often subjected to premature judgment. Comments made by other writers in the group can steer you in entirely wrong directions and can be detrimental to the creative growth of a writer. And you can end up with enormous blind spots as all the writers in the group coalesce into a similar style and output. And that leads us to the next way of learning, which I'm going to call the mentor over-the-shoulder way, whether in person or online. This is basically like personal one-on-one guidance from someone who knows what they're doing or has some industry experience and is going to show you one-to-one how to do it. And they walk you through what you need to know, sometimes in response to a script that you've written, getting feedback or an assessment, or sometimes just starting from scratch. So you get direct feedback and guidance. Any questions you have can be answered directly by your mentor. The help you get is personalized, based on your specific writing, your unique skills, and what the mentor thinks you personally need. And there's an inbuilt accountability to this approach. Writers tend to naturally lift their game out of a sense that they need their work to be worthy of their mentor's time and energy. The downside, obviously, is that finding an effective mentor is very rare indeed. And if it's not rare, it's going to be very expensive. The time and energy it takes for a skilled professional to help a writer or small group of writers is enormous. It's not just the time it takes to give feedback, it's the time it takes to read, to process, to think about all that information, and to find the best way to deliver that insight to help you improve. You're reliant on the quality of the mentor. Just because someone is a talented writer doesn't mean they have the skill of being able to teach how to do what they do or guide you yourself. often you end up with biased outcomes. The mentor steers you in the direction they would go, so their advice is always going to be specific to their worldview and their opinions. Even if you have the great fortune of finding a top quality personal mentor, this really shouldn't be your primary way of learning the craft, because you're completely reliant on another person's skills and synchronicity for your own results. Now, there is something fundamental that's missing from literally all of the ways that I've described so far in this video. A key component, a skill that professional writers must have, that none of these ways are particularly well equipped to teach you. And that's why what I'm calling the sixth way is so appealing to new writers and would-be filmmakers. It's the hands-on production way. What you basically do is put together an outline or a scriptment or the basic broad strokes of what you want the movie to be, and then you just go out and film it. Look, the only real way to learn screenwriting is to write for production. Until you actually see your words get turned into a movie, there's a whole skill set that's necessary for screenwriting that's fundamentally missing from the craft itself. This is one of the biggest challenges in all of screenwriting. As a producer looking for material, you can recognize very quickly when a writer has no hands-on production experience. It's just in their words. It's just in the way they tell the story. So by jumping into production, you learn those essential required skills that are missing from all educational approaches. You see how your words or ideas translate to the screen. It cuts through all the theory and BS. It's 100% practical, because it doesn't really matter if you have a great idea if we can't film it or if it's impractical to shoot it at that particular time. So you're forced to instantly scale back to the core of what writing for the screen is all about. This sharpens your creative problem-solving skills in a way that no academic approach to writing for the page ever could, and prepares you for what the role of a screenwriter is really all about. Now, the downside of this approach is that you're not really learning screenwriting. Filmmakers and writers often take this approach because they think it's a shortcut to a great story. But the truth is, there are things you are going to learn from the production process you simply can't learn any other way. But there are also things that you cannot learn from the production process. So if this is your sole or primary approach to learning screenwriting, you end up with huge blind spots that limit your ability to tell compelling, effective screen stories. The lessons you learn on a given film are often not even applicable to other projects. Every project is unique, so finding a way to creatively solve this problem on this film may only ever be relevant to that film. And because you're learning as you go, your permanent filmography will always include those kind of embarrassing student-y films you cut your teeth on. So that leads us into today's bonus way, which is what I'm going to call the combination way, which is really the very best way to learn all this. Look, the truth is, if you want to learn the craft of screenwriting, you're going to have to take elements from each one of these different approaches. But the way that's going to lead to actual results is the way that understands and respects what screenwriting itself is all about. And largely, screenwriting is about the words on the page, your ability to pitch the story ideas that you have, and your understanding of how your words will translate to production. One way to intentionally use the combination approach is through film school, where you'll dig deep into the craft of screenwriting and apply it to filmmaking. You'll make student films and short films and get a good sense of the overview of the craft. Now, aside from the enormous cost of it, the downside is that you can have academia biases in film school, and certainly personality politics often come into play. And because you're in that educational bubble, it's often more about the exercise than about creating a product for the marketplace. Another combination approach is what I'm trying to build, an indie film studio focused on learning and experiencing the writing process, and then applying those new skills to the production of real films. But even if I can successfully build that, there's probably an upper limit on how many films we can make. So the other combination way would be a build your own approach, which is what I'm trying to help you do through this channel, which is why I'm always going to recommend that you learn the process-driven way first, supplementing your unique passions and interests with the self-taught way. And then once you have that complete understanding, that complete process, then you dig into further classes and courses depending on your unique passions. Ideally, finding a writer's room group that's nurturing and positive and productive and in sync with where you're trying to go, and really write for production. Now, I'm such a big believer in all this that I obviously built as much of this as possible into the system that I created. But whether you ever join me or not, I have to give you a big warning. Much of the screenwriting education industry is simply missing key insights. They're overlooking or ignoring or simply don't know about certain skills you need to develop to actually reach a professional level of screenwriting success. It's so essential that I want to devote a whole episode to it. So in the next episode, we're going to look at 6 things your screenwriting education missed so that we can make sure you don't miss those things. So that video is right here. Click here and we'll see you there. Or if you're ready to start writing for production, click here to start the process. Thanks for watching.